Trisha, known from 9 to 5 as the timid, soft-spoken executive secretary at Seoul's most prestigious tech conglomerate, stood over an unconscious cartel enforcer, the jagged bottleneck still gripped in her shaking hand. She pushed a terrified, crying waitress behind her back, refusing to back down even as 3 more armed thugs rushed the floor. She thought she was just risking her own life to save an innocent girl during the desperate, illegal night shifts she worked to pay off her family's debts. She had absolutely no idea that the silent, terrifying man watching her bleed from the shadows of the VIP balcony above the true king of this illegal syndicate was none other than her strict, billionaire boss. And he was just discovering that his perfectly obedient, quiet secretary was far more dangerous and far more intoxicating than he ever imagined. Welcome back to Annie's Empire of Love, where high-stakes power bows to the raw truth of the heart. Today, we are stepping into a story that will challenge everything you know about secrets, survival, and a cold mafia king who meets his match. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and leave a thumbs up on this video. Now, dim your lights, and let's find out what happens when the underworld collides with an innocent heart. Let's begin. The executive floor of the Taeyang Syndicate high-rise was a fortress of black marble and soundproof glass. It was a place where careers were made and broken in total silence. And for the past 6 months, 24-year-old Trisha had survived up here by mastering one specific skill, becoming completely invisible. She wore sensible beige cardigans over her cheap pencil skirts, kept her natural hair pulled back into a tight, neat bun, and pushed her oversized glasses up her nose. To the rest of the building, Trisha was just the quiet, mousy secretary who typed at lightning speed and brewed the perfect cup of black coffee. But beneath the plain exterior was a woman drowning. The crushing weight of her father's gambling debts to local loan sharks meant her generous corporate salary barely covered the interest. She desperately needed this job. She needed the health insurance, the stability, and the paycheck. Losing it was a literal death sentence, which was why she endured working for Chairman Kang Tae-jun. Tae-jun was a man who didn't just walk into a room, he commanded it like a god stepping onto a battlefield. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features, broad shoulders perfectly tailored into custom Italian suits, and a gaze as cold as absolute zero. He was the CEO of one of South Korea's most powerful tech conglomerates, yet rumors whispered that his true empire existed entirely in the shadows. Men who crossed him in the boardroom had a habit of disappearing entirely. He never raised his voice, he rarely smiled, and his presence alone was enough to make grown executives tremble. Trisha was terrified of him. She made sure her desk was immaculate, his schedule flawless, and her voice barely above a whisper when she briefed him on his morning meetings. But survival on the top floor came with one absolute, undetrishable rule. It was the first thing the imposing head of security had told her on her very first day. The chairman demands perfection, Trisha, but above all, he demands discretion. When the clock strikes 6 p.m., you leave. No matter what you hear coming from his private office, no matter who steps off that private freight elevator, you do not look up, you do not ask questions, and you never, under any circumstances, stay past 6. For 6 months, Trisha had followed the rule flawlessly. She packed her bags at 5:59 p.m., kept her head down, and escaped into the city before the chairman's dark world could swallow her whole. But tonight, a devastating phone call from her father's debtors was about to change everything. The digital clock on Trisha's sleek, minimalist desk flashed a terrifying number, 6:14 p.m. She had broken the one absolute rule of the executive floor. 14 minutes ago, she was supposed to be in the lobby, blending into the sea of departing corporate employees. But her hands were shaking so violently that she couldn't manage to pack her tote bag. Her cell phone lay face up on her desk, the screen glowing with a single, chilling text message from an unknown number. Your father's interest is due by midnight. If you don't have the cash, we're taking his fingers. Don't try to hide. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. The crushing weight of her reality paralyzed her. She needed to get to her secret second job at the underground casino, the only place where she could scrape together enough under-the-table cash to keep her father alive. She was frantically trying to print out a falsified schedule to show her landlord when the heavy, automated lights of the 50th floor suddenly powered down, plunging the sprawling executive suite into a deep, moody twilight. Then, the sound echoed through the silence. Ding! Trisha's blood ran cold. It was the private freight elevator, the one hidden behind a seamless wall of black mahogany, the one the head of security explicitly told her never to look at. When the clock strikes 6 p.m., you leave. No matter what you hear, you do not look up. Trisha immediately dropped to her knees, hiding beneath the lip of her desk. She held her breath, pressing her hands over her mouth to muffle her own terrified panting. The heavy doors slid open with a smooth mechanical hum. Instead of the crisp, authoritative footsteps of executives, she heard a violent, wet thud against the wall. Then, a low, agonizing groan that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Against every survival instinct screaming in her brain, Trisha slowly peeked around the edge of her desk. Stumbling into the dim light of the corridor was Chairman Kang Tae-jun. But he looked nothing like the untouchable, immaculate billionaire who commanded the boardroom just hours prior. His suit jacket was gone, his tie was ripped loose, and his pristine white dress shirt was soaked in a terrifying spreading patch of crimson blood on his left side. He leaned heavily against the glass wall, his breath coming in ragged, sharp gasps before his knees finally buckled. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor. Trisha froze. Her mind raced with justifications. Run. Sneak to the stairwell. If anyone finds you here, you'll be fired. Or worse, the people who attacked him might be coming up the elevator right now. She assumed it was a ruthless corporate mugging or a deranged former employee seeking revenge. She had absolutely no idea that the man bleeding out on the floor had just single-handedly dismantled an ambush by 6 heavily armed cartel assassins in an underground parking garage. Tae-jun let out another sharp cough, his hand weakly pressing against the deep laceration in his ribs. Trisha squeezed her eyes shut. She thought of her father. She thought of the cruelty of the world, of how easy it was for people to look the other way when someone was suffering. She couldn't do it. She just couldn't leave another human being to die alone in the dark. Abandoning her hiding spot, Trisha kicked off her sensible heels and rushed across the floor. "Chairman," she whispered frantically, sliding to her knees beside him. The moment her hands reached for him, Tae-jun's survival instincts flared with lethal speed. Even critically wounded, his reflexes were terrifying. His hand shot out like lightning, his large blood-stained fingers wrapping around her throat in a vice grip. He pinned her to the floor, his pitch-black eyes snapping open. They were feral, empty, and completely devoid of humanity, the eyes of a predator ready to kill. Trisha gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs, but she didn't fight him. She didn't scratch or scream. Instead, she looked directly into those terrifying dark eyes, her own soft brown eyes brimming with desperate empathy. "It's me," she choked out softly, raising her small hands to gently wrap around his massive, trembling wrist. "It's Trisha. Your secretary. You're safe, sir. Please, let me help you." For a split second, time suspended. Tae-jun stared down at the mousy, invisible woman who brewed his coffee every morning. The violent storm in his eyes faltered, replaced by a flicker of utter shock. He realized he was choking the only innocent thing in his building. His grip instantly released, and he fell back onto the marble with a heavy groan, his energy finally giving out. "You shouldn't be here," he gritted out, his voice a low, raspy command that still carried absolute authority. "Leave now." "I'm not leaving you to bleed to death on the floor, Mr. Kang," Trisha scolded, her voice trembling but laced with a surprising stubborn fire he had never heard from her before. Without hesitating, she shucked off her thick, beige cardigan. She folded it over twice to create a thick makeshift bandage. "This is going to hurt," she warned softly. Before he could protest, she pressed the wadded cardigan firmly against the deep wound on his side, applying all her body weight to staunch the bleeding. Tae-jun hissed in pain. his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. But as the blinding pain subsided, a strange, foreign sensation washed over him. Warmth. Her hands, though small and shaking, were incredibly gentle. She wasn't looking at him with the fear or sycophantic greed he was so accustomed to from his peers. She was looking at him with pure, unadulterated concern. Her dark curls had escaped her severe bun, framing her beautiful, melanin-rich face as she leaned over him, murmuring soft words of encouragement. "Just keep breathing," she whispered, her thumb subconsciously brushing a stray lock of hair away from his sweat-slicked forehead. "You're going to be okay. I've got you." Tae-jun was a man who ruled the Seoul underworld with an iron fist. He had never been held. He had never been comforted. He was a weapon, forged in violence and betrayal. Yet here, lying on the floor of his empire, this quiet, unassuming woman was treating him like a fragile, precious human being. His chest tightened with a dangerous, unfamiliar ache that had absolutely nothing to do with his wound. Suddenly, the unmistakable chime of the main elevators broke the silence. "Ding, Chairman." The frantic shout belonged to Ji-hoon, his lethal head of security, followed by the heavy thud of tactical boots rushing down the hallway. Trisha's eyes went wide with sheer terror. The rule. She was caught. She would be fired, her father would be killed, and she would lose everything. She immediately released the pressure on his wound, her panicked eyes darting toward the emergency exit stairwell. "Keep the pressure on it," she whispered frantically to Tae-jun, grabbing his large hand and pressing it over her bloody cardigan. "I'm sorry. I have to go." Before Tae-jun could reach out to stop her, before he could even utter a word to demand she stay, Trisha scrambled to her feet. She grabbed her purse from her desk, scooped up her heels, and sprinted into the shadows, disappearing down the emergency stairwell just seconds before his security team rounded the corner. Tae-jun lay on the floor as his men surrounded him, shouting for medical trauma kits. But the ruthless Mafia boss wasn't looking at them. He was staring down at the ruined, blood-soaked beige cardigan pressed against his chest. It smelled faintly of vanilla and cheap lavender soap. And as he closed his eyes, the memory of her soft, trembling hands ignited a dark, obsessive spark in his soul that would completely alter the course of both their lives. The following morning, the Taeyang Syndicate high-rise felt like a tomb. At 7:45 a.m., Trisha stepped off the main elevators, her stomach twisted into a sickening knot. She had barely slept. After fleeing Tae-jun's bleeding body, she had sprinted directly to the underground casino, and during an agonizing, terrifying night shift surrounded by the city's worst criminals, just to make her father's interest payment. Her body ached. Her mind was entirely shattered, and as she walked toward her desk, she fully expected to find a cardboard box waiting for her. She had broken the golden rule. She had seen the chairman weak, vulnerable, and bleeding. Men like Kang Tae-jun did not leave loose ends. She braced herself for the head of security to step out of the shadows and drag her away. But her desk was perfectly empty. Her computer screen glowed with the standard login prompt. The executive floor was exactly as it had been yesterday, silent, pristine, and flawlessly intimidating. Taking a shaky breath, Trisha placed her purse in her bottom drawer, smoothed out her fresh gray skirt, and began her morning routine. What she didn't know was that just 30 feet away, hidden behind the impenetrable, one-way mirrored glass of his private office, the apex predator of Seoul was watching her every move. Tae-jun sat in his high-backed leather chair, perfectly still, his dark eyes locked on the monitors that fed directly from the floor's hidden security cameras. Beneath his immaculate, custom-tailored navy suit, his ribs were tightly bound with fresh bandages. A team of underground surgeons had spent the night stitching him back together. They had advised him to rest. He had ignored them. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the desperate, gentle pressure of her small hands against his chest. He heard the soft, defiant tremor in her voice telling him he was going to be okay. It made absolutely no sense. For 6 months, she had been a ghost to him, just a quiet, obedient employee who poured his coffee and lowered her eyes when he walked past. But now, watching her through the lens of the camera, It was as if he was seeing her for the very first time. He noticed the dark, heavy circles under her beautiful brown eyes, poorly hidden by cheap concealer. He noticed the rigid, defensive posture of her shoulders. He zoomed in on the camera, his jaw tightening. When he caught the faint, purpling bruise blooming on her delicate wrist, a harsh reminder of his own violent reaction when she had tried to save him. He should have fired her. From a tactical standpoint, she was a liability. She had breached his perimeter. She had seen the blood. Yet, when he opened his bottom desk drawer, his gaze fell upon a blood-stained, wadded-up beige cardigan sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. His men had tried to throw it away. He had nearly broken his lieutenant's arm for touching it. The soft chime of his office intercom broke his dark reverie. Chairman Kang. Trisha's soft, professional voice filtered through the speaker, carrying the slightest, barely perceptible tremor. Your black coffee is ready. Tae-jun tapped the button on his console. Bring it in. The heavy mahogany doors slowly pushed open. Trisha walked in, her eyes glued firmly to the floor, balancing the fine china cup and saucer on a silver tray. The air in the room was suffocating. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to run, but she forced herself to walk steadily toward his massive desk. Tae-jun didn't sit behind his desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, bathed in the cold morning light, looking completely untouched by the violence of the previous night. He looked like a god. Good morning, sir, Trisha murmured, setting the coffee down with a soft clink. She didn't dare look up. Your 9:00 AM board meeting has been prepped. And the look at me, Miss Washington. The command was soft, but it carried the lethal weight of an executioner's blade. Trisha's breath hitched in her throat. Slowly, agonizingly, she raised her chin, her soft brown eyes finally meeting his pitch-black, predatory stare. Her heart hammered against her ribs so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. Tae-jun stepped closer, closing the distance between them with slow, measured steps. The proximity was overwhelming. He towered over her, his broad shoulders blocking out the light. As he neared, his sharp senses picked up something underneath the scent of her vanilla lotion. Smoke. Stale whiskey. The distinct, metallic tang of fear. It was the scent of the underground, a scent a quiet, mousy secretary should absolutely never carry. Tell me, Tae-jun purred, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into a low, rumbling timbre that sent a shiver straight down her spine. Did anything out of the ordinary happen when you closed the office last night? He was testing her. He was standing mere inches away, giving her the perfect opportunity to panic, to cry, to beg for her job, or demand hush money. Trisha swallowed hard, digging her fingernails into her palms to keep her hands from shaking. She summoned every ounce of survival instinct she possessed. No, Chairman, she lied smoothly, her voice completely steady, refusing to break eye contact. I finished my filing and left the floor promptly at 5:59 p.m., exactly as instructed. I saw nothing. A profound, dangerous silence stretched between them. Tae-jun stared down at her, searching her eyes. He saw the sheer terror hiding behind her brave facade, but he also saw the unyielding, stubborn resilience. She was protecting him. Even now, terrified out of her mind, she was keeping his secret. A dark, possessive thrill coiled deep in his gut. Excellent, he whispered softly, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. I value employees who know how to follow the rules. You are dismissed. Trisha let out a shaky breath, gave a quick bow, and practically fled the room. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind her, Tae-jun's facade dropped. He didn't move. He just stared at the empty space where she had just been standing. From the shadows of the private adjoining room, Ji-hoon, his lethal head of security, stepped out quietly. Chairman, she saw the blood. She knows you were compromised. It is protocol to have her relocated or silenced permanently. Tae-jun's head snapped toward his second-in-command. The look in his eyes was so violently possessive that Ji-hoon instinctively took a step back. If anyone lays a single hand on her, Tae-jun stated, his voice a deadly, icy vow, I will personally sever it from their body. Ji-hoon swallowed, bowing his head immediately. Yes, boss, but she is hiding something. She looks exhausted. And the scent on her jacket. I know, Tae-jun interrupted, turning back to look out the window at the sprawling city of Seoul. His mind raced with the image of her bruised wrist and the smell of casino smoke clinging to her hair. She was living a double life. Someone was hurting her, and the very thought of it made a violent, homicidal rage flare in his chest. Ji-hoon. Yes, Chairman? Dig into her life, Tae-jun ordered, his voice echoing in the massive room. Find out where she goes after 6 p.m. Find out who her family is. Find out who she owes money to. I want her bank records, her phone logs, and her movements mapped. Tear her entire life apart piece by piece and bring it to me by midnight. Understood. Ji-hoon bowed and exited the room. Tae-jun looked down at his desk, picking up the hot cup of coffee she had just poured for him. He took a slow sip. His quiet, obedient secretary thought she could hide her demons from him. She thought she could save his life and simply walk away. She had no idea that the king of the underworld was about to step out of the shadows, and he wouldn't stop until he owned every single piece of her. 3 days later, a thick manila folder landed heavily on Chairman Kang Tae-jun's massive glass desk. Everything you asked for, boss, Ji-hoon said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. It's worse than we thought. Tae-jun didn't say a word. He flipped the folder open, his dark eyes scanning the documents. As he read the intelligence report his head of security had compiled, a terrifying, icy rage began to radiate from his body, dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. Trisha Washington wasn't just a struggling immigrant trying to make ends meet in Seoul. She was the sole caretaker of a cripplingly addicted father who had racked up 50 million won in debt to a filthy, low-level street gang. And to pay the exorbitant weekly interest and keep them from breaking her father's legs, his quiet, rule-abiding secretary had taken a second job working the late-night VIP service shifts at a subterranean gambling ring. Tae-jun's jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered near his temple. The gambling ring she was working at was the Black Lotus. It was one of his casinos. His beautiful, terrified little bird was flying directly into his own viper's nest every single night, serving drinks to the city's worst scum, completely unaware that the man who owned the building was the very same man she made black coffee for every morning. Tae-jun glanced at the sleek clock on his wall. 5:45 p.m. 15 minutes before her ironclad departure time. He pressed the intercom button. Ms. Washington, step into my office. A moment later, the heavy mahogany doors parted. Trisha walked in, clutching her digital tablet like a shield to her chest. She looked exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes were heavier today, and despite her perfectly pressed beige cardigan and neat bun, there was a brittle fragility to her, like a glass perfectly struck and ready to shatter. Yes, Chairman? She asked softly, keeping her eyes fixed on his polished dress shoes. Come here, Tae-jun commanded. Trisha hesitated, her heart giving a violent, panicked thud. She forced her feet to move, stepping across the expansive room until she was standing just a few feet away from him. Tae-jun was dressed impeccably, save for his suit jacket which hung over the back of his chair and the silver cufflinks he held loosely in his large palm. My shoulder is stiff today, he lied smoothly, his deep voice a velvet rumble. The wound she had bandaged 3 days ago was actually healing perfectly. Fix my cuffs. Trisha's eyes widened behind her oversized glasses. For 6 months, they had never shared a space smaller than the width of his massive desk. He had never asked her for anything remotely personal or physical. She swallowed hard, her throat bone dry. Of course, sir. She took a tentative step closer, entering his immediate personal space. The scent of him, rich bergamot, expensive cedar, and dark power immediately surrounded her, making her head spin. Her hands were trembling visibly as she reached out to take the first silver cufflink from his palm. Her soft, warm fingers accidentally brushed against his cold, callous skin, and a jolt of electricity instantly snapped between them. Trisha gasped softly, trying to pull back, but Tae-jun didn't move an inch. He simply stared down at her, watching the frantic pulse jumping wildly at the base of her throat. As she fumbled with the buttonhole on his crisp white sleeve, completely focused on the task, Tae-jun took the opportunity to finally study her up close. He saw the faint smattering of freckles across her nose. He saw the way her thick lashes fluttered against her cheeks. She was breathtaking. And she was his. "I need you to stay late tonight, Miss Washington," he murmured quietly, the sound vibrating through his chest and directly into her hands. Trisha froze. The cufflink slipped from her fingers, clattering softly against his watch. "Stay late?" she repeated, her voice pitching up in pure panic. She glanced at the clock. 5:52 p.m. If she was late to the Black Lotus, the pit boss would dock her pay. If her pay was docked, she couldn't make the drop. If she didn't make the drop, her father would bleed. "We have the Nakamura merger to review," Tae-jun continued smoothly. Though his pitch-black eyes never left her face, he was testing her. He wanted to see how far he could push before she broke. "I expect you to remain until the files are digitized. It will likely take until midnight." I apologize, Chairman," Trisha stammered, taking a desperate step backward. "But my employment contract explicitly states my hours conclude at 6 o'clock. "I own the company, Trisha," he said softly, using her first name for the very first time. The sound of it falling from his lips felt dangerously intimate. "I am the contract. I am telling you to stay." Terror and desperation warred on Trisha's beautiful face. But then, something incredible happened. The mousy, invisible secretary vanished. Her spine snapped completely straight. She raised her chin, and for the first time since she had walked into the room, she looked him dead in the eyes. "No," the single syllable hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Tae-jun's breath hitched. In his world, no one said no to him. Men had literally died for hesitating to follow his orders. "Excuse me?" he purred, taking a slow, predatory step forward, backing her up until her spine hit the heavy oak of his bookshelf. He leaned in, placing one hand on the shelf beside her head, trapping her entirely in his shadow. "Did you just deny a direct order?" Trisha was shaking, but she refused to look away from his terrifying obsidian gaze. "I have prior obligations, Chairman," she said, her voice dropping the polite, corporate softness and taking on a fierce survivalist edge. "Obligations that I cannot break for you, or for this company. My time after 6 o'clock is my own." Tae-jun's gaze dropped to her mouth. He could feel the heat radiating off her body. "And what if I decide your defiance is grounds for termination?" Trisha's eyes flooded with unshed tears of pure frustration, but her jaw set like stone. She reached up, pushed her glasses firmly up her nose, and ducked right under his arm, escaping his trap. "Then you will have my resignation letter by morning," she fired back, her hand already turning the solid brass doorknob. "Have a good evening, Mr. Kang." The door clicked shut behind her. Tae-jun stood frozen in the middle of his office. His chest was heaving. He raised his hand, staring at the perfectly fastened silver cufflink on his wrist. A slow, dark, utterly wicked smile spread across his handsome face. She hadn't cowered. She hadn't begged. She had looked the most dangerous man and soul in the eyes and bared her teeth to protect her family. "Ji-hoon," Tae-jun called out, his voice ringing with a terrifying, absolute authority. The door to the private suite opened, and his lieutenant stepped out, bowing deeply. "Yes, boss?" "Cancel all my evening meetings," Tae-jun ordered, walking over to his desk and pulling a sleek, matte black Glock 19 from the center drawer. He checked the magazine with a sharp metallic clack before sliding it effortlessly into his shoulder holster. "Get the car ready. Tonight, I'm paying a personal visit to the Black Lotus." The Black Lotus underground casino was a sensory assault of pulsing red neon lights, choking cigar smoke, and the heavy, intoxicating scent of greed. Trisha moved quickly through the crowded, dimly lit aisles of the slot machines, balancing a tray of watered-down whiskey on one hand. The mousy, invisible secretary from the 50th floor was completely gone. In her place was a woman stripped of her corporate armor. She wore the casino's mandatory uniform, a tight thigh-skimming black dress with a plunging neckline, her beautiful natural curls left wild and loose around her shoulders. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely exhausted. She checked her cheap wristwatch. 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes until the deadline. She had managed to scrape together just enough tips to cover her father's weekly interest payment. Her thighs ached from standing in cheap heels, and her nerves were entirely frayed. But relief was finally beginning to wash over her. She just needed to make the drop and get out. "Hey, sweetheart," a grating, sinister voice called out from the shadows of the high-roller hallway. Trisha's blood ran completely cold. She froze in her tracks. Stepping out from beneath the flickering neon sign of the VIP lounge was Bae, the ruthless mid-level enforcer who held her father's debt. He was flanked by two massive, tattooed thugs. Bae smiled, revealing a row of gold-capped teeth, his eyes raking over Trisha's exposed curves with sickening hunger. "Going somewhere?" he sneered, tossing a switchblade from hand to hand. "I have the money," Trisha said quickly, her voice trembling as she set her tray down on a nearby poker table. She reached into her dress, pulling out a thick envelope of crumpled bills. "It's all here. Every single one. Now leave my father alone." Bae didn't take the envelope. Instead, he stepped uncomfortably close, grabbing her wrist so violently that Trisha gasped in pain. It was the exact same wrist Tae-jun had bruised 3 days ago. "Things have changed, little bird," Bae whispered, his foul breath fanning across her face. "Your old man hit the tables again this morning. He lost big. The principal just doubled." Trisha's heart plummeted into her stomach. No, that's impossible. You said if I paid the interest, I don't care what I said." Bae barked, slamming her hard against the velvet-lined wall. The air rushed out of Trisha's lungs. The two thugs stepped forward, completely blocking her from the main casino floor. No one in the establishment even batted an eye. In the Black Lotus, violence was just background noise. "You don't have the cash," Bae purred, trailing the cold, flat side of his blade down her jawline. "But you're a pretty little thing. My boss runs a private hostess club across town. We put you to work there for a few years, and we'll call the debt even." Pure, unadulterated terror seized Trisha's chest. She knew exactly what kind of work went on in those clubs. It was a death sentence. "Don't touch me," she screamed, her survival instinct taking over. She blindly reached out, grabbing a heavy glass ashtray from the nearest table, and smashed it across the side of Bae's head. The enforcer stumbled back with a roar of pain, blood instantly pouring down his temple. Trisha tried to run, but one of the thugs grabbed her wildly by the hair, throwing her brutally to the carpet. "You stupid bitch," Bae snarled, wiping the blood from his face. He drew his arm back, his eyes wild with homicidal rage. "I'm going to cut you to ribbons." Trisha curled into a ball on the floor, throwing her arms over her head, squeezing her eyes shut as she braced for the fatal strike. But the blow never came. Instead, the deafening, chaotic noise of the casino completely vanished. The blaring hip-hop music was abruptly cut from the speakers. The slot machines went dark. A terrifying graveyard silence fell over the sprawling room. Trisha slowly opened her eyes. Bae was frozen mid-strike, his switchblade trembling in the air. The color had completely drained from his face. He was staring at the end of the hallway, looking as though he had just seen the devil himself. The heavy oak doors of the VIP lounge had been kicked open. Stepping out of the shadows, flanked by 10 heavily armed men in matching tactical suits, was Kong Tae-jun. Trisha's breath stopped, her mind fractured in two. Chairman Kang? Here? But this wasn't her CEO. The immaculate corporate facade was completely stripped away. He wore no jacket. His black dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal dark, intricate Yakuza-style tattoos winding up his powerful forearms. But it was his face that terrified her the most. It was a mask of absolute, psychotic rage. He radiated a lethal, suffocating aura of pure violence that made the air in the room feel heavy and toxic. "Lord Kang," Bae choked out, his voice cracking in sheer terror as he immediately dropped his knife and fell to his knees. His thugs instantly followed, pressing their foreheads to the filthy carpet. "We were not informed you were visiting your casino tonight." Trisha's heart stopped beating. His casino. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in her mind. The absolute silence on the 50th floor. The men who vanished from the boardroom. The bullet wound she had bandaged. Her strict, demanding billionaire boss was the supreme king of the Seoul underworld. Tae-jun didn't look at Bae. His pitch-black, predatory eyes locked directly onto Trisha, who was trembling on the floor in her degrading uniform, her hair a mess, a fresh scrape bleeding on her shoulder. A deadly, terrifying calmness washed over Tae-jun. He reached under his arm, slowly drawing the matte black Glock 19 from his shoulder holster. "Who gave you permission?" Tae-jun whispered, his voice echoing through the dead silent casino like the tolling of a funeral bell. "To touch what belongs to me." Bae looked up, sheer confusion and panic washing over his bloody face. "My lord? She's just a waitress. She owes us money. She's a nobody." Bang! The gunshot was deafening. Trisha screamed, covering her ears as Bae's body crumpled violently to the floor, instantly dead. The two thugs beside him didn't even dare to scream. They just stayed pressed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably in pools of their boss's blood. Tae-jun lowered his smoking gun, his expression completely unchanged, as if he had just swatted a fly. He stepped over the bleeding corpse, his expensive leather shoes leaving crimson footprints on the carpet, until he was standing directly over Trisha. The veil was gone. The safe bubble she had lived in for 6 months had violently, irreparably popped. The man standing above her was not a businessman. He was a monster who killed without a second thought. And he was looking at her with a dark, obsessive hunger that paralyzed her very soul. Tae-jun slowly extended his large, blood-spattered hand down to her. "Hello, Ms. Washington," the Mafia boss murmured softly, a dark, possessive smirk playing on his lips. "It seems we both have our secrets." Trisha stared at the massive, blood-spattered hand suspended in the air between them. The sharp, metallic scent of gunpowder and freshly spilled blood completely overpowered the stale cigar smoke of the casino. Her lungs refused to pull in oxygen. Her brain short-circuited, trapped between the polite, obedient secretary who instinctively wanted to take her boss's hand, and the terrified prey who knew she was looking into the eyes of a monster. Bae's lifeless body lay just inches from her knee, his blood beginning to seep into the cheap fabric of her dress. Tae-jun patiently held his hand out, his pitch-black eyes dark with a terrifying, twisted affection. He expected her to take it. He expected her to submit to the lethal protection he was offering. Instead, survival instinct shattered Trisha's paralysis. She let out a strangled, terrified sob, violently scrambling backward like a cornered animal. She ignored his outstretched hand, her bare palms scraping against the rough carpet as she pushed herself up. She didn't look back. She turned and sprinted toward the casino's emergency exit, her bare feet slapping against the concrete as she threw her entire body weight against the heavy metal door. "Boss!" Ji-hoon barked, his hand dropping to his weapon as his men immediately shifted to pursue her. "She's a liability." She saw everything. Tae-jun slowly lowered his empty hand. The dark, possessive smirk vanished from his lips, replaced by a cold, calculating stillness. He raised 2 fingers, stopping his men dead in their tracks. "Stand down," Tae-jun commanded, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that demanded absolute obedience. He watched the emergency exit door slowly swing shut, the faint sound of her frantic footsteps echoing up the concrete stairwell. Let her run. She needs to exhaust herself before she realizes the cage is already locked. He pulled a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket, methodically wiping the microscopic speck of blood from his knuckles. "Clean this mess up. Then, bring the car around. We're going to her apartment." 45 minutes later, Trisha burst into her tiny, dilapidated, 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Seoul. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely throw the deadbolt lock. She slammed the chain into place and backed away from the door, her chest heaving as she slid down the peeling wallpaper until she hit the floor. He killed him. Chairman Kang killed a man right in front of me. Tears of pure, unadulterated panic streamed down her face. She clamped both hands over her mouth, to muffle her hyperventilating sobs. Her father was passed out on the ratty sofa in the living room, completely oblivious to the fact that his gambling debt had just triggered a bloodbath. Trisha forced herself to stand. She didn't have time to cry. She had to run. She dragged a dusty duffel bag from beneath her bed and began frantically throwing clothes into it. She grabbed the envelope of cash she had meant to give Bae, her passport, and her father's medication. She was going to drag him to the train station. They would go to Busan. They would change their names. She would vanish so completely that Kong Tae-jun would never find her. She zipped the duffel bag shut, hauling it over her shoulder. "Dad," she whispered harshly, shaking his shoulder. "Dad, wake up. We have to go right now." Her father groaned, swatting her hand away, lost in a drunken stupor. "Please," Trisha cried, tugging at his arm. Before she could pull him up, a sound echoed through the tiny apartment that made the blood freeze in her veins. Click. It was the sound of the deadbolt unlocking from the outside. Trisha dropped the duffel bag. She backed away slowly, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs as the doorknob slowly turned. The chain snapped with a violent, metallic crunch, the screws completely tearing out of the cheap wooden frame. The door swung open. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was Ji-hoon, flanked by 4 massive men in dark suits. They stepped inside, filling the cramped living room with an oppressive, suffocating weight, parting straight down the middle to clear a path. Stepping over the ruined threshold was Tae-jun. He had put his suit jacket back on, once again looking like the immaculate, untouchable billionaire CEO. But Trisha knew the truth now. The tailored suit was just a sheath for a deadly, merciless weapon. Tae-jun's dark eyes slowly scanned the dilapidated apartment. He took in the peeling paint, the leaking ceiling, and the drunken man passed out on the sofa. Finally, his gaze locked onto Trisha, resting on the packed duffel bag by her feet. "Going somewhere, Miss Washington?" He purred smoothly, stepping fully into her space. He closed the door behind him. Trisha backed up until her shoulders hit the kitchen counter. She reached behind her, her trembling fingers wrapping around the handle of a kitchen knife resting by the sink. "Stay away from me," she warned, her voice shaking uncontrollably. I resign. Effective immediately. I won't tell the police. I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just let me and my father leave." Tae-jun stopped just a few feet away. He looked down at the knife hidden behind her back, a dark, dangerous amusement flickering in his eyes. "Resignation denied," he said softly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, blood-stained ledger. Trisha recognized it immediately. It was Bae's black book. Tae-jun tossed it casually onto the kitchen table. "Bae's syndicate no longer exists. I wiped them off the map 20 minutes ago," Tae-jun explained, his voice conversational, as if he were discussing a corporate merger rather than a massacre. "Which means your father's 50 million won debt no longer belongs to the streets." He stepped closer, towering over her, his dark aura entirely swallowing her in shadow. "It belongs to me." Trisha gasped, the knife slipping from her slick fingers and clattering into the metal sink. "No." "Yes," Tae-jun whispered, reaching out to trace the soft curve of her jawline. Trisha flinched, but he didn't let her pull away. His large, warm fingers firmly gripped her chin, forcing her to look up into his infinite, terrifying eyes. "You thought you could hide from me, Trisha. You thought you could bleed for my empire and I would just let you walk away." His thumb brushed over her trembling lower lip. "You don't work on the 50th floor anymore. You don't pour my coffee, and you certainly do not wear degrading dresses in my underground casinos. What do you want from me?" She choked out, tears of sheer helplessness spilling over her lashes. "Everything," Tae-jun stated with terrifying honesty. "Your debt is paid. But you are the collateral. From this second forward, you belong to me. You breathe when I say so. You sleep where I tell you to. You are my personal shadow, and if you ever try to run from me again—" He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear, sending a violent shiver down her spine. "I will burn this entire city to the ground just to find you. For 2 weeks, Trisha had lived as a captive queen inside the sprawling, impenetrable glass fortress of Chairman Kang Tae-jun's penthouse. Her father had been quietly relocated to an elite, heavily guarded rehabilitation facility in the countryside, paid for entirely by the Taeyong Syndicate. As for Trisha, her world had shrunk to 10,000 square feet of white marble, bulletproof glass, and suffocating luxury. Her cheap cardigans and skirts had been replaced by racks of silk dresses and cashmere lounge sets. But it was a gilded cage, and Tae-jun was its terrifying warden. His obsession with her was absolute. He didn't just keep her close, he consumed her entirely. He refused to sleep unless she was in the same room. He tracked her every movement through the penthouse security feed. Yet beneath the terrifying possessiveness, there was a strange, undetrishable reverence. He had not touched her against her will. He treated her like a rare, fragile artifact that the brutal world outside was desperate to shatter. And the brutal world was absolutely watching. It was a torrential Tuesday night. Thunder shook the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, mirroring the violent storm brewing in the criminal underworld. Tae-jun's decision to slaughter Bae and his men over a casino waitress had not gone unnoticed. It had shown the rival factions the one thing Kang Tae-jun had never possessed before: a weakness. "I will be back by midnight," Tae-jun murmured, his large hands resting heavily on Trisha's shoulders as he stood by the private elevator. He was dressed in full tactical gear, a matte black assault rifle slung over his shoulder. A syndicate uprising at the docks required his immediate, violent attention. He tilted her chin up, his dark eyes burning with that familiar, terrifying intensity. "Do not open the doors for anyone. Do not leave the sight of my men. Understand?" Trisha swallowed hard, the electric heat of his touch sending a traitorous shiver through her body. "I understand." Tae-jun lingered for a fraction of a second, his thumb brushing over her lower lip in a silent promise, before the elevator doors slid shut, swallowing him into the shadows. For the first hour, the penthouse was suffocatingly quiet. Trisha sat in the dark, cavernous living room, staring out at the rain-lashed skyline. Two of Tae-jun's elite guards stood by the main entrance, silent as statues. Then, at precisely 10:14 p.m., the impossible happened. The lights in the invincible penthouse flickered, buzzed wildly, and completely died. The hum of the climate control vanished. The digital security locks beeped once, a long, dying sound, before falling completely silent. The backup generators, designed to kick in within 3 seconds, remained dead. Someone had severed the building's main power grid from the inside. Movement in the stairwell. One of the guards shouted, instantly raising his weapon, the beam of his tactical flashlight cutting through the pitch-black room. "Breach. We have a breach." Before Trisha could even stand, a deafening explosion rocked the heavy steel-reinforced doors of the penthouse. The concussive wave shattered the million-dollar vases lining the hallway and threw Trisha brutally to the floor. The air filled with thick, choking smoke and the blinding flash of automatic gunfire. "Ms. Washington, run to the panic room." The second guard screamed, grabbing her by the arm and shoving her down the hallway, just as a barrage of bullets tore through the space where they had just been standing. Trisha scrambled on her hands and knees, terror giving her adrenaline. She could hear the heavy, synced thud of tactical boots flooding the penthouse. There were dozens of them. They wore night vision goggles and the crimson serpent emblems of the Red Viper cartel, Tae-jun's most ruthless rivals. "Find the girl." A harsh, raspy voice barked over the chaotic gunfire. "The boss wants her alive. Kill everyone else." Trisha's blood turned to ice. They were here for her. She sprinted blindly through the dark master bedroom, feeling her way toward the hidden panel behind Tae-jun's bookshelf. Her hands shook violently as she fumbled in the dark for the biometric scanner that would open the panic room. But the power was completely dead. The scanner wouldn't read. "No, no, no, please," she sobbed frantically, slamming her fists against the impenetrable steel wall. Well, look what we have here." The terrifyingly calm voice came from the bedroom doorway. Trisha froze, slowly turning around. Standing in the doorway, illuminated by the flashes of lightning outside, was a towering man with a heavily scarred face and a silver revolver gripped casually in his hand. It was Ryang, the vicious underboss of the Red Vipers. Two massive mercenaries flanked him, their rifles leveled directly at Trisha's chest. Trisha backed up until her spine hit the steel door of the useless panic room. There was nowhere left to run. Ryang stepped into the bedroom, his heavy boots crunching over shattered glass. He holstered his revolver and pulled out a high-powered tactical flashlight, shining the blinding beam directly into her eyes. He stepped in close, grabbing her roughly by the jaw. Trisha thrashed wildly, screaming as she clawed at his thick forearm, but he just laughed, a cruel, soulless sound. "So, the rumors are true," Ryang mocked, inspecting her face as if she were a piece of meat at a butcher's stall. The untouchable Iron King finally found himself a little pet. Wiped out an entire street crew just to keep you. That makes you very, very valuable. He will kill you, Trisha spat, her fear suddenly overshadowed by a fierce, protective defiance she didn't know she possessed. "If you touch me, Kong Tae-jun will slaughter every single one of you." Ryang's smile vanished, his eyes turning cold and dead. Without warning, he backhanded her across the face. The sheer force of the blow sent Trisha crashing to the floor, her lips splitting open against her teeth. Her head spun violently, her vision blurring as the taste of copper flooded her mouth. "Grab her by the hair," Ryang ordered his men, stepping back. Rough hands yanked Trisha up from the floor, pinning her arms behind her back with enough force to nearly dislocate her shoulders. She gasped in pain, blood dripping from her chin onto her white silk dress. Ryang casually reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a secure, encrypted satellite phone. He dialed a number, putting it on speakerphone, and held it up in the suffocating darkness of the bedroom. The line rang only once. "I gave orders that this channel was only for emergencies," Tae-jun's voice answered. He sounded breathless, the chaotic sound of gunfire echoing in his own background. "I'd say this is an emergency, Chairman Kang," Ryang purred, his scarred face twisting into a sadistic grin. A terrifying dead silence fell over the line. "Ryang?" Tae-jun whispered, his voice dropping into a register of pure demonic rage. "Where are you?" "I'm standing in your bedroom, Tae-jun," Ryang sneered, grabbing Trisha by the throat and tilting her face up toward the phone. "And I'm holding the only thing in this world you actually care about." He squeezed her throat tightly, forcing a pained, terrified gasp from Trisha's lips directly into the phone's microphone. On the other end of the line, the sound of the Dockland shootout abruptly stopped. "If she sheds a single tear," Tae-jun's voice came through the speaker, so cold and absolute that even Ryang's mercenaries visibly shuddered, "I am going to peel the skin from your bones while you are still breathing." Big words for a man who is 30 minutes away, Ryang laughed, cocking the hammer of his silver revolver and pressing the cold steel directly against Trisha's temple. "You have exactly 10 minutes to surrender the southern shipping ports to the Red Vipers, or I blow her beautiful brains all over your expensive sheets." Trisha closed her eyes, tears finally slipping down her bruised cheeks as the cold barrel of the gun dug into her skin. She was completely, undetractably trapped in the crossfire of monsters, and time had just run out. The digital clock on the bedside table, running on a faint backup battery, flashed a bleeding red number, 10:21 p.m. 7 minutes had passed since Ryang made the call. 3 minutes left, sweetheart, Ryang taunted, the cold barrel of his silver revolver still pressed painfully into Trisha's temple. "Your Iron King must not love you as much as you thought. He's stuck at the docks 30 miles away. Even if he drove at 200 miles an hour, he wouldn't make it to save you." Trisha kept her eyes squeezed shut, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. Blood dripped slowly from her split lip, staining the collar of her white silk dress. She prepared herself for the end. She thought of her father, safe in the countryside, completely unaware of the sacrifice she had made. "Boss," one of the mercenaries standing by the door said, his voice laced with sudden unease. He tapped the side of his earpiece. "The men in the lobby, they aren't responding. Radio silence on floors 40 through 49. Ryang frowned, his grip tightening on Trisha's hair. "What do you mean, radio silence?" The elevators are disabled. I don't know, the mercenary stammered, raising his assault rifle. It's just static. A low, vibrating hum began to tremble through the floorboards of the penthouse. It wasn't the thunder from the storm outside. It was a rhythmic, heavy, mechanical thumping that grew exponentially louder by the second, shaking the shattered glass on the floor. Ryang's eyes widened. He rushed toward the shattered doorway, dragging Trisha with him by the hair. Helicopter. They're on the roof. But he was wrong. They weren't on the roof. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, rising from the black abyss of the stormy city, the massive, matte black fuselage of a military-grade stealth chopper materialized through the torrential rain. Its searchlight snapped on, blinding the entire room in a piercing beam of white light. Before Ryan could even scream an order, the reinforced glass of the penthouse windows completely exploded inward. A hail of suppressing fire tore through the bedroom, shredding the drywall and obliterating the two mercenaries guarding the door before they could even pull their triggers. Ryan shoved Trisha violently to the floor, diving behind the solid oak frame of the bed as tactical smoke grenades hissed into the room, plunging the space into chaotic, blinding gray fog. Through the deafening roar of the chopper blades and the blinding smoke, a shadow detached itself from the rappel lines outside and stepped into the penthouse. It was Kong Tae-jun. He didn't look like a CEO, and he didn't look like a man. He looked like the literal god of death. His expensive tactical gear was soaked in rain and blood. He held an assault rifle in his hands, his pitch-black eyes glowing with a demonic homicidal fury that froze the air in the room. He hadn't been at the docks. He had anticipated the decoy and mobilized his aerial strike team the second the power grid flickered. Fire. Kill him. Ryan screamed from behind the bed, wildly shooting his silver revolver blindly into the smoke. Tae-jun didn't flinch. He didn't seek cover. He walked straight through the hail of bullets like an immortal force of nature. His rifle barked pop, 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 3 devastatingly precise headshots that dropped the remaining Red Viper reinforcements rushing down the hallway. The penthouse was a slaughterhouse, and Tae-jun was the apex predator executing his prey. Ryong panicked. He realized his men were dead, his plan was destroyed, and the monster he had taunted was standing 10 feet away. Desperate, he lunged out from behind the bed, grabbing Trisha from the floor and violently yanking her against his chest, pressing his revolver directly under her chin. Drop the gun. Ryang shrieked, his voice cracking in sheer terror. His entire body was shaking as he hid behind Trisha's bruised, trembling frame. Drop it, or I swear to God I'll blow her head off. Tae-jun stopped dead in his tracks. The suffocating silence of the room was broken only by the rain lashing against the ruined windows and the heavy, ragged breathing of the men. Tae-jun slowly lowered his assault rifle, his chest heaving. His eyes locked onto Trisha. He saw the blood on her chin. He saw the swelling purple bruise forming on her cheek, where Ryang had struck her. Something inside the Iron King permanently snapped. The last shred of his humanity evaporated. He didn't speak. He didn't negotiate. With terrifying, blinding speed, Tae-jun's right hand whipped down to his thigh holster. Bang! Ryong screamed in agony, his silver revolver clattering to the floor. Tae-jun hadn't aimed for Ryong's head, he had aimed a millimeter past Trisha's shoulder, completely obliterating Ryong's right hand. Trisha collapsed to her knees, covering her ears as Ryong fell backward, clutching his bloody stump of a wrist. Before the underboss could even hit the ground, Tae-jun was on him. He threw his own weapon aside, grabbing Ryong by the throat with both hands and slamming him brutally against the concrete pillar of the bedroom. The sickening crunch of Ryang's ribs echoed over the storm. I told you, Tae-jun roared, his voice a guttural demonic sound that shook the very foundations of the building. He slammed a heavy tactical knife into Ryang's shoulder, pinning him to the drywall. I told you what would happen if you made her cry. Wait, I surrender. Ryang sobbed, blood bubbling from his lips. Take the ports. Take everything. I don't want the ports. Tae-jun whispered darkly, drawing a second, viciously curved karambit blade from his belt. I want your life. With a brutal, merciless slash, Tae-jun ended the threat of the Red Vipers forever. Ryang's lifeless body slumped to the floor, joining the sea of corpses that littered the immaculate penthouse. The battle was over. The bad guys were not just defeated, they were completely eradicated. Tae-jun stood amidst the carnage, his chest heaving, his hands coated in the blood of his enemies. Slowly, the homicidal rage draining from his posture, he turned around. Trisha was kneeling in the center of the ruined room, shaking violently, surrounded by shattered glass and shell casings. Her white dress was stained, her beautiful face bruised and pale. The terrifying Mafia boss, the man who had just dismantled an entire cartel in under 3 minutes without breaking a sweat, dropped his weapons to the floor. His hands began to tremble. He fell to his knees directly in front of her, ignoring the shards of glass biting through his tactical pants, completely humbling his massive, terrifying frame before the quiet secretary who had just stolen his entire soul. The torrential rain blew sideways through the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows, soaking the ruined master bedroom. The deafening hum of the stealth chopper faded into the distance as Tae-jun's men secured the perimeter, leaving the two of them entirely alone in the wreckage. Tae-jun remained on his knees among the shattered glass and shell casings, his massive chest heaving. Slowly, agonizingly, he reached up and tore the blood-soaked tactical gloves from his hands, throwing them aside. He stripped away the heavy Kevlar vest, discarding the armor that made him the Iron King, until he was just a man vulnerable, trembling, and entirely focused on the weeping woman in front of him. He reached out, his bare, calloused hands shaking as he gently cupped her bruised face. The moment his skin touched hers, the dam holding back Trisha's sanity completely shattered. She flinched, letting out a raw, agonizing sob that tore from the deepest depths of her chest. She didn't just cry. She broke. The months of suffocating anxiety, the terror of her father's debts, the degrading nights at the casino, and the sheer, unspeakable horror of almost being executed all crashed down on her at once. "Don't!" Trisha cried out, her small fists coming up to weakly push against his broad, solid chest. "Don't touch me. Just let me go. Please." Tae-jun's face crumpled in agony, but he didn't pull away. He let her hit him. He let her pound her fists against his chest, absorbing every ounce of her fear and rage. "I can't do this," Trisha screamed, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood on her chin. "I'm not a mafia queen. I'm just a secretary. I just wanted to pay off the debt. I just wanted to keep my dad alive. But now there's blood everywhere, and I'm a prisoner, and you kill people like it's nothing. I can't breathe in this world." Her strength gave out, her hands sliding down his shirt as she collapsed forward, sobbing uncontrollably into his chest. Tae-jun immediately wrapped his massive arms around her, pulling her completely into his lap. He buried his face into her damp, wildly curled hair, closing his eyes as his own breathing hitched. For the first time in his 32 years of life, the untouchable cartel boss felt the terrifying sting of tears pricking the back of his eyes. "I know," he whispered, his voice a broken, raspy plea, completely stripped of its usual terrifying authority. "I know it's dark. I know I am a monster, Trisha. But I was dead before you looked at me." Trisha's sobbing slowed, her breath hitching as she listened to the frantic, pounding rhythm of his heart against her ear. "For 30 years, I have lived in absolute darkness," Tae-jun confessed, his voice shaking with raw, unchecked vulnerability. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his thumbs gently wiping the tears and blood from her cheeks. "I didn't know what warmth was. I didn't care if I lived or died. But then I bled out on that marble floor. And you didn't run. You put your soft hands on me and told me I was going to be okay." He pressed his forehead against hers, closing his eyes tightly. "I told you that you were collateral," he whispered, the absolute truth finally breaking free. "I lied. I told you that because I was terrified. I was terrified that if I gave you a choice, you would look at my world, look at my bloodstained hands, and walk away. I couldn't survive that, Trisha. I would rather burn the entire city to the ground than spend a single day without your light." Trisha stared at him, her chest rising and falling heavily. The terrifying mask of the Mafia boss was completely gone. Looking back at her was a man deeply, desperately in love, begging for the one thing all his money and power could never buy, her heart. "You terrified me," Trisha whispered, her voice trembling, but the fear was finally melting away, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. She slowly reached up, her small, delicate fingers tracing the sharp, tense line of his jaw. "You locked me in a cage." "Then the cage is broken," Tae-jun vowed instantly. He caught her hand, pressing his lips desperately against her palm. "You are not a prisoner. You are my equal. If you want to leave, if you want to walk out that door right now, I will give you half my fortune and a new identity, and I will never let a single shadow touch you again. I will let you go." He looked at her, his pitch-black eyes entirely open, completely baring his soul. "But if you stay, I swear to you on my life, Trisha, no one will ever make you bleed again. You will never have to be invisible again. I will lay the entire world at your feet." Trisha looked around the ruined room, at the violence he had committed just to keep her breathing. She looked back at the terrifying, beautiful man who held her as if she were the very oxygen in his lungs. The corporate secretary who had lived her entire life in fear was dead. She didn't want to run anymore. With a shuddering breath, Trisha slid her arms up and wrapped them tightly around Tae-jun's neck. She pulled herself up and pressed her lips fiercely against his. Tae-jun let out a ragged groan, his arms tightening around her waist like a vice, pulling her flush against his body. The kiss was desperate, raw, and tasted of salt and copper. It was an absolute surrender from both of them, a collision of two broken souls finally finding their sanctuary in the middle of a war zone. 6 months later, the morning sun poured like liquid gold through the open terrace doors of a sprawling private estate on the cliffs of Jeju Island. The suffocating, bloody shadows of the Seoul underground were a lifetime away. Here, the air tasted of sea salt and blooming jasmine. Trisha stood by the massive stone balustrade, looking out over the crashing ocean waves. The mousy, invisible secretary in the beige cardigan was entirely gone. In her place stood a queen. She wore a breathtaking, floor-length emerald silk robe that cascaded over her curves, her natural curls pinned up with expensive diamond clips. She didn't look down at the ground anymore. She held her head high, radiating a quiet, absolute power that commanded every room she entered. Behind her, the heavy wooden doors of the study opened. Ji-hoon, the lethal head of security, stepped onto the terrace. He didn't just nod his head, he stopped a respectful 5 paces away and bowed at a perfect, deep 90-degree angle, a gesture of ultimate submission reserved only for the supreme head of the syndicate. "My lady," Ji-hoon said softly, keeping his eyes respectfully lowered. "The transfer of the southern shipping ports to the new legitimate cargo shell company is complete. The board is awaiting your final signature." Trisha turned, a soft, confident smile playing on her lips. She had taken over the entire legitimate front of the Taeyang syndicate. No more loan sharks, no more underground casinos. She had forced the empire into the light, and anyone who had a problem with it had immediately answered to the monster who stood permanently by her side. "Thank you, Ji-hoon," Trisha replied, her voice steady and warm. "Have the legal team wire the first quarter profits to the city's debt relief charity, as we discussed." "Yes, my lady," Ji-hoon bowed again and seamlessly retreated into the house. A moment later, heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed on the terracotta tiles. Kong Tae-jun walked onto the sunlit terrace. He wore perfectly tailored linen trousers and a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the dark, intricate ink of his tattoos barely visible beneath the cuffs. To the rest of the world, he was still the Iron King, a terrifying, ruthless apex predator who ruled South Korea with an iron fist. Men still trembled when he walked into a room. But when his pitch-black eyes landed on Trisha, the monster completely vanished. He didn't have a weapon in his hands. Instead, the fearsome king of the underworld was carrying a fine china cup and saucer on a silver tray. Tae-jun walked up to her, his dark eyes entirely soft, and offered her the cup. "Your morning vanilla latte, my queen. Exactly how you like it." Trisha laughed, a bright, beautiful sound that echoed over the cliffs, taking the cup from his hands. You know, the CEO of Taeyong shouldn't be fetching coffee. People will talk. Let them talk, Tae-jun purred, stepping into her space and wrapping his massive arms around her waist, pulling her back against his solid chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling the sweet scent of her perfume. I don't work for them. I work for you. He slowly turned her around to face him. The absolute devotion in his eyes was staggering. He took the coffee cup from her hands, setting it on the stone ledge, before taking a deliberate step backward. Right there, bathed in the morning sunlight, the most dangerous man in Asia dropped gracefully to one knee. Trisha gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth as Tae-jun reached into his pocket. He pulled out a sleek velvet box and snapped it open, revealing a flawless, breathtaking diamond ring that caught the sunlight like a burning star. 6 months ago, you saved my life, Tae-jun murmured, looking up at her from his knees, metaphorically and literally surrendering his entire empire at her feet. You dragged me out of the dark. You conquered a monster without ever lifting a weapon, Trisha. You own my heart, my soul, and every breath in my lungs. He took her left hand, his calloused thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. Marry me, he pleaded softly, his voice thick with raw emotion. Rule this empire with me. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are the only law I will ever bow to. Tears of pure, overwhelming joy spilled over Trisha's lashes. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back at the past. She looked down at the terrifying, beautiful man who had literally burned his own world to the ground just to keep her safe. Yes, she whispered, pulling him up from his knees and throwing her arms around his neck. Yes, Tae-jun. Always, Tae-jun crushed his mouth to hers, lifting her off her feet as the ocean breeze wrapped around them. He had built a fortress of violence and shadow, but she had turned it into a sanctuary of light. He was the undisputed king of the city, but as long as he had breath in his lungs, everyone would know that she was the one who ruled him.